Let's now look at what is really going on in our world. Okay? What we want to see is the growth of anarchy, of true anarchy, of the understanding that no one is an authority over others, that there is no legitimacy to rulership or being the master of another person, meaning perceiving other people as their slaves. There is no moral legitimacy to that. That's what this movement is truly about. It is not about wanting to do harm to anybody. It is not about destruction of anybody's property or rights. It is not about chaos or lawlessness. It is about the destruction of human slavery. That is what anarchy is. Anarchy is ending the perception that some people have the moral right to rule others and that others have the moral obligation to obey their commands. That is what anarchy is about ending. Okay, so is anarchy growing? Is that understanding in human consciousness growing? I would say absolutely it is not growing. Anarchy is not growing, ladies and gentlemen. It is being pushed out of mainstream consciousness. Authoritarianism is growing. The hardening of the belief in authority is growing in the minds of the public. The understanding of anarchy is growing in an infinitesimally small group of people. A handful, comparatively, to the total amount of people in the human population. On the other hand, authoritarianism is growing rapidly. People are cheering on the draconian authoritarian measures that are being enacted by governments worldwide during this not globally engineered, socially engineered, perceived crisis. That if people weren't so brainwashed by the mainstream media, they wouldn't even notice anything different is occurring in human society. And that's the problem, folks. We're dealing with television heads. We're dealing with mainstream media watching ignoramuses that don't even understand how ignorant they are. And this community is failing at their job in educating the mass public. And it shows me how little people understand what the real work is to do. And that is to reach people who have bought into the mind control of the mainstream media and change their minds, help them to change their minds. And yes, that is an unbelievably massive effort, but can it be done? Yes, it can be done if enough people make it their charge to do it. And sadly, not enough people have made that their life's work. They're still too concerned over their own situation and trying to protect what they believe they have. So, why is the anarchist community really truly failing at this work in helping to influence and change the mindset of others? And it isn't about explaining all the machinations that are going on in government. It's not explaining all of the manipulations that are going on in the financial markets, etc. No, it's way, way larger than that. So the main question that needs to be asked is, why have anarchists failed to stem the rising tide of authoritarianism? And indeed they have. If you believe we're winning, you're delusional. If you believe anarchism is rising, you're delusional. Sorry to break it to you just like that, but you need to hear it if that's what you think. Authoritarianism is rising, and anarchists as an entirety, as a body of people, have not stemmed the tide of rising authoritarianism. And all you need to do, if you believe that it has, all you need to do is visit any major city in the world and look at the attitudes of the people. They are abjectly ignorant and abjectly under mind control and abjectly rooted in authoritarianism. And if you don't believe that, I think you're living in the middle of nowhere and you're sheltered as a human being. And you need to wake up and you need to go into the heart of population centers and really look at the dynamic of consciousness that is taking place there. Because if you don't, and you're just from some rural area or from some suburban community, and you believe because of the friends you have and frequent and talk amongst that anarchism is rising, I think you're a delusional human being. And you don't understand the real dynamic that's taking place in the world. To understand how affecting in a negative way the mind works and how that's so important, and how we should never underestimate the ability of social engineering and the social engineers who conduct it, and how we should never treat it lightly such that we think, oh, somebody else's ignorance isn't my responsibility. Yes, it is. That affects you. That affects me. I've worded it in this way. Other people's ignorance is our enslavement. It's the enslavement of you and me. So if you don't want you and I enslaved, okay, you better worry about other people's wrong ideas, and you better work to change them. That is our responsibility collectively, as a community and as a species. The mind is what ultimately directs and manifests all change in our environment, for better or worse. Whoever is directing what is going on in the mind is also engineering the change in our society. So once again, folks, are we directing that change of the mind toward the truth and toward real principles and toward real positive change? Or is someone else externally affecting our minds and doing that, and therefore steering society in the way they want it to manifest? I think the answer should be clear to people who are paying attention, but sometimes I'm not really so sure that this community is. I think they don't really believe that mind control goes on. Many of them are not familiar with occult principles because they see the word occult the way others see anarchy. Others see anarchy as chaos and lawlessness, when in fact the community often sees the occult as, ridiculous beliefs and little practices that, crazy, weirdo people do, and they don't understand what the occult is deep ancient psychology about how the human mind works. And if a small amount of people understand how those dynamics work, and the bulk of humanity does not, it's a piece of cake to manipulate people and bring them into whatever mindset that small, community of people in the know want to direct them. Piece of cake. Taking candy from a baby. So the question that this community really needs to be asking is, whose hands are these? That's the question that you guys need to ask and learn. It's not just the international bankers. Most of you think that that's who it is. It's not the politicians, and it's not the bankers behind a lot of the political machinations. It goes way deeper than that, and you need to understand it. And you need to understand that it's an occult priest class. Moral relativism is the ideology that objective morality does not exist inherently in nature, and that right and wrong are merely subjective constructs which human beings may invent and arbitrate according to time, location, circumstance, or preference. Right and wrong are whatever we as human beings say they are. And let me tell you something, folks, this is the basis of all of man's law, which anarchists say that they do not want to live under. That's why something could be a right in one area and a wrong in another. Moral relativism brings that dynamic of the violence of man's law into being. And then when you talk to people in the anarchist community, many of them will say, I don't believe in objective right and wrong. It's a subjective thing. No, it's a belief that it's subjective. So that's the actual definition of moral relativism. And if you agree with this ideology, you are the enemy of freedom. Let me just restate that unequivocally. Blanket statement. Every single human being that believes and agrees with the ideology that objective morality doesn't exist in nature, and that right or wrong are subjective constructs that mankind can make up, you are the enemy of freedom. You are the kind of person that is putting humanity into enslavement. Absolutely, definitively true. They say this is for us to know and not for them
Only
to know.
on Johnny Bigger.
So we can manipulate them, like I said, like taking candy from a baby. And that's exactly what they're doing. It's not even a contest. They can manipulate the situation at will because the population is ignorant of natural law. Natural law is a set of universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable conditions which govern the consequences of the behaviors of beings with the capacity for understanding the difference between harmful and non-harmful behavior. That means it applies to human beings and those of higher level consciousness than human beings. It does not apply to species that are of lower cognitive ability to understand the difference between right and wrong than human beings. Natural law is consequential law, governing dynamics of behavior that apply to human beings and higher levels of consciousness. Meaning, if you can definitively understand what the difference between right and wrong is, doesn't mean if you do. It means if you have the capacity to understand what the difference between right and wrong is, natural law applies to you. And that means it applies to all human beings, objectively and inherently in the universe, in nature. This is a scientific law and a scientific understanding. There are laws that apply to human behavior that this community doesn't want to acknowledge. The understanding of natural law is centered upon two things. First, it is centered upon the knowledge of objective morality, which means if you don't have the knowledge of objective morality, you can't really definitively understand how natural law works. And two, is hinged upon or centered upon the alignment of our behavior as human beings to that knowledge of objective morality, which again, that's predicated upon the first principle of understanding the objective morality first. Understanding real, objective moral principles. So this means that we must know, not think we know, not believe. This has nothing to do with belief. It is about definitive knowing of an occulted law inside the universe, in
Only
nature.
On Johnny Bigger.
That is not able to be just perceived with the eye or traditional scientific instrumentation. But it is knowable by its measurable and observable and repeated effects when it comes to what we receive as a consequence as a whole in society. And all you need to do to ask yourself whether we understand natural law is, what are we receiving as a result? Are we receiving freedom right now, or are we receiving abject enslavement? And then you'll know how many people really understand natural law. That's the factor that's driving the whole dynamic, folks. And many of you guys still don't understand it. And let me tell you something. It's really pathetic, and you should understand it by now. So we have to definitively know which behaviors are right and which are wrong. That means knowing which behaviors are right because they do not initiate harm to other sentient beings, and which behaviors are wrong because they do initiate harm to other sentient beings. That is the bottom line foundation.
To stay up to date with our latest videos, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the button above this video.